Hey, great. Thank you so much, Lori, for that amazing introduction. Hopefully we were both worthy of it. So we wanted to start with a brief background of us, mostly because as a mediator and as someone who's a big proponent of restorative justice, we really believe in relationship building. So getting to know the people around us, meeting with people around us, getting to know their backgrounds, because it's really important that our referral sources, so you as lawyers, trust us enough to send us your clients. And so building those relationships are really important. So my background, I started in criminology as an undergraduate because due to things that had happened as a child, I was always very fascinated with the criminal justice system and why people committed crimes. I was very focused on trying to learn that, and I felt like if I learned that, then maybe I can go into a career that helped to prevent it. So thought I wanted to go into law enforcement. So during my undergrad, I worked as a student border officer for 4 years, and very quickly realized that I don't have a law enforcement personality, but it did really help me learn some skills about human behavior, which as a mediator we need to rely on quite heavily. I decided to do my master's degree in restorative justice at the Simon Fraser University to further my studies, because eventually I thought I wanted to work into policy and try to change the criminal justice system from within. And then quickly learned that as I started working on the ground level in social services, that I love that one-on-one client work far too much. So started with Westman Mediation Services in Brandon. It's not my hometown. I moved here because my husband got a job here, but quickly fell in love with the city. And so started with Westman Mediation Services in early 2016. We have a territory that's quite large. So we not only work in the Brandon area, but we also have an office in Dauphin. So we have the whole Westman kind of Portage-la Prairie to the Saskatchewan border, up to Swan River, and then down to the US border. We started in only criminal matters and recently have moved to add family matters as well. So that's a brief history of me. I'm sorry that Travis couldn't join us today. He has a very similar background to myself. He also worked in federal corrections, very quickly realized that as he moved into the parole system, that the victims didn't get enough of a say in the process, and so left the federal government to take a job in a nonprofit. So we both have that background and use that in our mediation. Rudy?
Thanks. And Lori, thanks for that fabulous intro. Very well stated. Thank you so much. I guess it started when I was born as a middle child, is when I realized that I was a bit of a mediator. But mechanical engineering was where I was headed until my mom, who was a chaplain for many years, said, Rudy, you got a really good ear. You're good at listening. You should really consider looking at some other options as well. So I have to thank my mom at the end of the day as to why I am not why I am, of course, but where I ended up landing. So to explore that, I did some voluntary service down in California, directed a Boys and Girls Club, but this roommate of mine was doing this mediation stuff, and it just really intrigued me. And so I switched programs and learned more about victim offender mediation, and that's where the bug bit me, or the mediation bug, as we say it. The rest is history. When I returned back to Winnipeg, Menno Simons College opened up, and they had this conflict resolution degree program, which wasn't in existence before when I was at UW, when I was just focusing on my athletics. So this was so exciting, and it was so incredible that I actually appreciated university and got grades higher than just a D or a C, but actually B's and A's because I was finally passionate about what I was studying. I then moved on, different experiences, but I ended up at Mediation Services back in the 90s. And I knew they were glory years. I just didn't realize just how incredible that experience was back then, working in a completely collaborative, flat structured organization where we take to heart the expression of turning judgment into curiosity. And I reiterated that again when I started here in March after I retired from the government. That's what I appreciate so much, is the openness, the questions, the intelligence, the inquisitiveness of the staff that are here. It makes it so easy to be here and such a blessing to be here. One of my exercises when I was in university was I had to go interview someplace that did mediation, and I went to Family Conciliation, interviewed the director there, and I left thinking, I am never going to work at that place, because Rudy was here to heal the world. They only work with parents who don't live together. No, I was going to heal everything. Well, fast forward about 15 years after that, I ended up at Family Conciliation and was just surrounded by a wealth of knowledge of, I was the new kid on the block at the age of 40, and the experience that people had was just off the charts, and I really learned so much from them. So it became the government qualified assessor and mediator there, designated, and that's where I've grown to learn, I would say, most of my experience, the various trainings and experiences there with some incredible people there. Retired and came to Mediation Services. I always said, you know, it's something I'd like to get back there. And lo and behold, here I am, and I'm in for it for a long haul. It's been great so far. So, and such a privilege to be here today, and seeing what we can pass on to those who are listening. So, sorry, I'm next on the list here in terms of a brief overview. I just want to emphasize too that we are not going to come close to covering what all is entailed to address this challenging topic of looking at mediation in domestic violence situations. So I just want to name that at the very outset, that we will miss pieces. There will be gaps. There'll be questions that you have beyond this. Give us a call. Let's have a conversation. Mediation is not appropriate for all circumstances. Rather, look at it as, how is this situation appropriate for mediation? We don't assume that everything is good for mediation. It would be the flip side. And that way is how I control my biases of the process to ensure that this is going to be something that's going to be helpful. Safe first and helpful in moving forward to tomorrow. So that's my brief comment there. Michelle, are you picking up on the next part here?
I completely agree. I always say that it's just another tool in a tool belt for our referral sources. So we really like to ground ourselves as mediators in the values and principles of restorative justice. And what that means is we have to hold ourselves accountable and responsible. And we also have to hold our clients accountable and responsible. So what we're looking for when we're doing that initial assessment, and Rudy's going to go into the intake process a little bit later, what we're looking for is for them to genuinely want to come to a resolution. So it's task focused, it's forward focused. We're not concentrating on the past, it's good context, but we're there to come to a resolution. And so as mediators, we always want to make sure that the process is as respectful as possible, as non-judgmental as possible, and that we lead with compassion and empathy. And that in doing that, we also ask our clients to follow that as well, so that we can provide the safest mediation and process possible. And that's not always easy to do. And that's why when Rudy says that not every case is going to fit for mediation, that's especially true with intimate partner violence. So we know that as mediators, and we have that in the back of our head at all times. Next slide, please, Lori. So we are going to do a brief, very brief overview of what we mean by intimate partner violence. And then we'll get into more of the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So next slide, please, Lori. So when we're defining intimate partner violence, when we're going through the categories, these are everyone knows pretty much what we're talking about. So this will be brief. So we're talking physical violence, right? So scratching, pushing, shoving, biting, choking, punching, use of a weapon, etc. Sexual violence. So this is any act of sexual violence, whether it's attempted or completed without the consent of the other person. Then we have stalking. So this is, a pattern of unwanted attention. So it's repeated messages, phone calls, emails, following someone, spying on them, showing up to places they are, damaging a person's personal property, harming or threatening to harm them, their family members, their pets, etc. And then, of course, we have psychological aggression. So this is verbal or nonverbal communication that's intended to harm someone. And there are many, many different examples, but some of the ones I thought I would highlight is it's anything from name calling to limiting access of someone's transportation, controlling money, controlling who their friends are, controlling access to family and friends, excessive monitoring of their whereabouts, to control of their reproductive or sexual health. And then also what we're seeing quite a bit of, or what I see quite a bit of, is exploitation of the victim's vulnerability, whether that's their disability, their immigration status. These are all things that come under psychological aggression. Next slide, please. So just like there are categories of IPV, there's also different types. And I wanted to highlight these because there's a big difference between the different types of IPV. And typically when we're going through our assessment and our intake process with our clients, there are some that are just going to be a better fit for mediation than others. So, and it's important for everyone to know, and especially for you all to know the different types, so that when you're meeting with your clients, it's just kind of like, okay, we've got kind of going through the list when we talk about these different types. So we have intimate terrorism. So this is an attempt to control. So the control is the biggest factor in intimate terrorism. So it's one partner attempting to use a wide variety of power and control tactics, including violence and all the different categories that I just laid out before. So it's usually, this one's usually perpetrated by males against females in opposite sex relationships. It can be done by females, and it does take place in same-sex relationships as well. So we have what's typical, but it's not 100%, 0%. And really what defines this is that control piece. And then we have mutual violent control. So this is actually where both members of the couple are trying to gain access to control each other. So this only occurs in a very small amount of cases, but we do see it, that there's this battle of control back and forth and back and forth. Then there's violent resistant. So this is a type of IPV where you have one of the members of the couple who is the target of that first type of intimate terrorism. So they're the victim and they lash out in a violent way. So the violent resistor is violent, but not controlling. It's the other partner that is the controller. So when they're facing their controlling and violent partner, they're acting out violently in response. And then the last one is situational couple violence. So situational couple violence is different. There's not that attempt to have power or control over the other partner. what it is a conflict will lead to an argument that leads to aggression and violence. So typically it's brought on by stressful situations, maybe mental health, maybe addiction, all of these different things, but there isn't those control dynamics. So it's situationally provoked. So it can happen once and be very minor, or it can happen frequently with more serious outcomes, but it's something happens, something leads up to what happens, and then the violence happens. So this is actually the most common type of IPV. It is equally perpetrated by males and females, and it can happen in same-sex and opposite-sex partnerships. And typically the programs that are designed to assist, so those your domestic violence, your building healthy relationship programs, typically those are the programs that are designed for this type of intimate partner violence. So the people who are involved in this type of violent IPV will respond best to those type of programs, because typically it's one of those many risk factors that we see leading up to the actual incident, and a lack of communication skills that exist in these type of relationships. So those are the different types of intimate partner violence. Next slide, please, Lori.
This is where I pick up. Thanks for that analysis of that, Michelle. It's my one little comment to add is I wish it was as easily identified as how Michelle summarized it, but it's these situations are so subtle and so easy to miss or not be aware of when we're speaking with our clients, that we just, our antennas have to be so high to hear and listen for the potential of IPV going on in these situations. Just in terms of the benefits of mediation, mediation itself is voluntary. It only works if people want to be here. We cannot force people to do mediation. A judge may recommend mediation. It doesn't mean that the judge says you have to do it. The judge may be saying you need to at least have a look and see if it's possible, hear about the process and the benefits of it, but we will never ever force people to do mediation. It just doesn't work. And I always let people know that right off the hop, that just because the court referral doesn't mean you have to do this. It needs to be something that you believe would be beneficial going forward for your situation. And in regards to your kids as well, because most of the mediations that we do here at Mediation Services involve the children as well, that are victims indirectly as well. So that becomes a significant focus. The resolution focus, we need we need to help identify what the circumstance or the issues are. We don't necessarily resolve the specific acts of the past. This is not an investigation, not finger point of who did this or who did that of past events, but rather how do we look at tomorrow and behaviors, and so that we can be more functional. I use the word parents because that's the primary focus of my mediations here. How do we become co-parents in the situation, even though there's these other adult issues that have made life so difficult that we can't live together. So in terms of coming up with, or who comes up with the resolution, that's the clients. As a mediator, I need to be as unbiased as possible. Notice I can't say that I will be unbiased. I'm human. I will make errors. I can't be totally unbiased, but I need to keep that in check. I will tell clients at the outset as well that if you feel I am being biased, please call me on it. I won't get defensive. Let me know what I said or did that indicated to you that I was being biased. I'll do the best I can to correct that. I'll own it. Because I need to have your confidence in my conducting this process in order for it to be effective. If you lose confidence with me, that's going to be challenging for us to go forward. And in fact, one of my more recent mediations I did, both parties at different times pointed out how they had challenges with me as a facilitator. And they sent me an email and they indicated exactly what it was that they found challenging about me. And my first reaction only by virtue of having done this for a long time was, okay, good. They actually articulated specifically what I said or did, so that I could go through with them and talk about what it was that I said or did that gave them this perspective. And when they understand more of why I said or did what I did and what the intention was, it became clear. Did I apologize for my actions? Sure, I have no problem apologizing for something that I said or did that came off wrong or that gave them this kind of effect. I need to respect that. I can't say, though, you shouldn't feel that way. That would be inappropriate. If they felt that way, that's a true feeling. I need to respect that. And so it's a good way for me to model even to my clients of how we take responsibility for actions or things we do to make our future interactions better. And so in that situation of that mediation, once working through those things, and then we could get back into the issues at hand, the conflict between the parents or the clients involved. We got together in our joint sessions, and in 45 minutes we were done. It happened that quickly. Just moving on here in terms of empowering victims, it's a given that when you're a victim, you feel less than, you feel controlled, all the things that Michelle was talking about. And the hope for the process of mediation is that they will find a way to find their voice, to be able to express what they need to express, that the other party will hear them, and that working with that other party, that they truly do understand the perspective that the other is speaking of. And that's my role as a mediator, to ensure that that's going forward. If I sense that that's not happening, there's a number of things I can do. And of course, I can't summarize all those aspects, but whether it's taking a time out, but at a minimum, I will be validating them individually, whether it's in a separate meeting during the session, if it's appropriate, or later on, of what their concerns are. What is it that they're trying to speak to? What's the trigger? What's going on for them? Because this needs to be understood by the mediator, so that and evaluated whether this is something that we can address within the mediation process or not. And more importantly, if this is one of the expressions I use is, we don't re-victimize victims. That's not the intention of mediation. If that's how you're feeling as a client, then we need to look at whether this process is appropriate. What can I do differently as a mediator to ensure that that isn't happening, because your voice isn't being heard or your concern isn't being understood, whatever it may be. That's my role, to try and work with them. Keeping focused on the issue of when we talk about mediation within parents that are separated, is keeping focused on the children, and that we are trying to work on a parenting plan so that they still get the love that they deserve from their parents. If parents have conflict and things aren't going well, it doesn't mean that the child therefore can no longer see that other parent. Now, take this comment with a grain of salt, that there's lots to unpack when I say that. It needs to be appropriate. If CFS is involved, that there's issues of actual abuse going on between the child and the other parent, or suspicions, that all needs to be investigated and looked at. And when those things arise, CFS is called by the parent and or myself, but I need to ensure that those steps are taken to ensure that the children's safety is first and foremost within this process. In terms of fair, it needs to be fair to both parents as we go forward. They need to feel that this process is one where they are being heard, that the concerns are being considered. But with that being said, they also need to be open to looking at different options. There needs to be a level of flexibility of looking at other ways. If I get a parent or a party who speaks of it is all the other person's fault, and it's only that, there's nothing I'm doing wrong, it's all them, in the back of my mind, that I have to fight the bias that I want to just say, we're not going to go forward now. Because if it is just so one-sided, there is a disconnect going on. We need to acknowledge that we can do something different in this situation to try and improve and make better the circumstances that are going on. So having flexibility and acknowledging the other parent's requests. So meeting with clients individually between sessions is incredibly common and most likely going to be happening once or multiple times through sessions as we work through to get them to shift their positions from where they feel that this is what I need to have happen, this is my request, to now I'm actually hearing the other party and what their concerns are and what can I do to contribute to the change that needs to happen between us to go forward from here. In terms of benefits, lower costs, mediators generally don't cost as much as lawyers. There's not as many involved. The process does happen a lot quicker. It's not dependent on remand dates or getting the right judge that's going to work with our case the correct way. I mean, I could go on different ways of how the court process can be cost more and take more time. Mediation is not perfect. We try to move forward as quick as we can. It's usually dictated by availability of getting 2 sessions. That dictates the speed of going forward because we're dealing with both, you know, up to 4 different schedules if there's co-mediation going on. We find that statistically speaking, satisfaction is definitely on the high end of 80+% clients who make it to the table and are able to complete a process where we have a resolution at the end, follow through. And that has more to do with the intake and the preparation going forward than anything that clients need to be ready for the process and not have their defensive briefcase with all their evidence of what's wrong with the other person set aside, but we need to speak from a perspective of openness, of making best efforts to go forward in this situation and have that vested interest. Without that, it's not appropriate for mediation. Go to next slide. So I've touched a little bit on the intake process here. Oh, sorry, I'll just wait till the slide goes. Here we go. And that intake is very, very critical. As I was saying before, I start more from the position of, is this appropriate? Not that it is, and maybe it shouldn't be. Again, it needs to be, safety is first. This needs to be a process where people feel safe and okay with what's going forward. Is it going to be comfortable, lean back, nice and relaxed? No, it will be challenging. And I need to make that very clear with clients too. But my hope is that when we go through this process and that parents are, or the clients we're working with are getting greater understanding of what's going on, they'll begin to buy in more and more of the process that, oh, they do understand, or they're willing to make some changes here. And, or, you know what, I'm actually okay with making that change given what I've heard the other parties state. So when we're doing intake, the initial contact that I have with them is not only just the addresses, etc., and using family situations as an example. It's not just about a parenting plan in terms of time. Asking them about what their primary issues are that they want to focus on, what are the factors that led to the situation, and I'm always ending off with some very specific domestic violence related questions, but a lot of my questions right from the very outset will start to raise flags for me of like, there's something else going on here. There's some deeper issues going on. And then with the specific questions about screening, then they realize, oh, or they may realize that, okay, that I can actually speak to this incident and or these really tough, intimate situations that are affecting what's going on here. Being aware of potential triggers, and I wrote in their mental preparation, what are their triggers, and asking them what is it that causes the difficulty, how do you respond, what happens for you when you're getting triggered by the other party. Those are all helpful for me as a mediator to know or to be aware that, okay, this is becoming uncomfortable, this isn't appropriate. I'll call for a timeout. I'll meet with people individually, ask them further of what's going on for them. I noticed that you had a bit of a response there. Can you tell me more about that situation or what's going on for you? When in regards to looking at further on of, sorry, I got lost here on this. I might jump on my point here with the triggers. So I may not be able to pick up all triggers, and people will do the best they can to save face, not show how they're feeling uncomfortable. So I'll ask clients, you may be presenting as nothing's going on for yourself, but I can't pick up all those cues. But if that's going on for you, there may be a word I ask them to speak of. I may have them hold their pen and just hold it to their cheek. That's them indicating to me that, what, I'm not comfortable with what's going on here. All right, I'm going to call for a timeout here, and I'll talk with them and see how we should or should not go forward from here. So again, those are all just some of the pieces that I need to do with getting people prepared. And in terms of mental preparations we know that he or she will present this way, or they'll have this kind of a language. Is that going to be okay with you? Or is it going to be too much of a trigger for you? So we can have those conversations ahead of time to see, is there a way that mediation could be applicable or helpful? But if it's not, it's not. And I need to let them know that they can be okay with that. Michelle, did you want to talk about types of IPV? I mean, you hit a lot of that already, but was there anything else you want to fill in there?
Yeah, thank you. So as I said before, with the different types of IPV, there are going to be like situational couple violence is more responsive to training and to counseling. It's also the type of IPV that will work best for mediation. That's not said that the other ones won't work as well, but in a mediation process, we have to be so careful about safety and about making sure that the process is voluntary and that someone isn't coerced into it. So we need to make sure that if we are seeing that, then this is not the right route, right? If people are saying, if one partner is saying, for instance, well, I'm willing to do mediation, but the other person definitely won't be, and trying to use mediation as a negotiation tactic or a control tactic, that's not something that we would ever try to mediate. I read a stat recently that said that males who abuse their partners are twice as likely to try and to seek sole custody of the children. So they do this for power and control, right? They're using their kids as bargaining tools. And so these are not the type of situations that we would ever consider to mediate. They're not taking the process seriously, and it won't be safe for both parties. And when we're looking at those power imbalances, self-determination is so key when it comes to a successful mediation. So as Rudy said before, it has to be voluntary. It cannot be coerced in any way. We can't, sometimes when I'm sitting with a person or I'm sitting with a couple, I can just feel that, there's something wrong. There's something that's not adding up, right? And so I always ask individually, why is mediation the right fit for you? And why is mediation the right fit for both of you? If I'm receiving answers that are forward focused, that are resolution focused, I can work with that, right? If I'm getting a lot of like, oh, well, this was suggested, or this was told to me, or, I'm kind of, it's not a good fit, right? If they're not able to use their voice, if their voice isn't going to be amplified, if they're not going to feel empowered in the situation, that's not a good thing. And when it comes to self-determination as well, for a victim of IPV, most likely throughout the violence, there have been many, many professionals or people in their life that have said to them over and over and over again, don't do something, or you need to do this, right? It's been a professional kind of guiding them through things. And maybe they have really good intentions, but that person has lost their voice through the IPV process. And as professionals, we need to be very careful that we're not making them lose their voice altogether, that we're giving them back their own power, their own voice to make their own choices, and that it's not being used against them. So essentially, it is important for every person to feel safe. And as Rudy said before, that goes down to even how the room is designed in mediation, you know, from making sure everybody knows where the, you know, escape routes are if they need to leave, right? If they need to not encounter the other person, from arriving at different times to the actual mediation, to knowing that if there is, like, confidentiality is key. And so if there is a breach of that, if there is a threat made, that will breach the confidentiality, and that will most likely end the mediation process completely. So making them feel safe right from that first off, and making sure that we listen more than we speak, especially in those first few meetings. I covered a little bit of the safety concerns and capacity, Rudy, but do you have more to add there?
No, just that is our number one concern going forward, without question. And that's first and foremost that we need to keep. Do they have a safety plan in place with when they're in their home, when the children are with them? There's a whole list of things that one needs to go through, ensuring that they have the phone number for the domestic violence crisis line or clinic, or some very good resources for them to have. Are they seeing a counselor? How are they able to process these kinds of things? Is this the first time they're talking about it? So again, many aspects of ensuring that as best as we can, that they're taking care of themselves, and they are in a safer place, or that they're moving themselves to a better spot. Yeah, so I'm going to skip along here a little bit, and just, our mediators trained in IPV? Yes, they are. We didn't actually use the word domestic violence in my early years of family conciliation. And then when we did that evaluation, we were all surprised that it was 80% of the time. We figured it was at least 50% or more, but when we actually crunched the numbers and we came up with 80%, we're almost kind of wondering, like, did we count correctly? But just how prevalent or how subtle it can be, that these kind of behaviors can be happening, and having the negative effects that they obviously have on people. I'm going to jump to parties having confirmed separate appointments. Yeah, so this is overlapping a bit with what Michelle was saying as well, that throughout the whole process, when we used to do For the Sake of the Children in person, we never had both parents in the same session. There was always in separate times. When they're arriving, we have them arriving at up to 15 minutes apart, ensuring that typically the one who feels particularly victimized arrives first, then the second party, and then upon leaving, they leave first. We hold the other client back for a while before they're dismissed from the office, offering escorts to their vehicles, even discussing ahead of time, getting picked up by someone so it can happen quickly. Whatever is going to make them feel more secure, we look at those options to ensure that this process is safe for them. Go to our next slide.
Yeah.
So this is where Michelle and I were sharing this counseling. I touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you want to say more about that, Michelle.
No, the biggest thing that I wanted to, in respect for the time and getting to your example, I just wanted to say that it's important for mediators to know the options out there. And while we don't like to, say you need to go and do these things, we can make suggestions when we feel like it might be a really good case for mediation. Perhaps they're missing some communication tools that they could get from programming that they could both utilize in the mediation process. I think it's important for us to know. And I actually, one of the things I do is I I facilitate a Building Healthy Relationships program. And so I think it's important that we know what's available in our area and we can make suggestions that will assist the mediation process in being successful.
Okay. Then I think, Michelle, maybe it makes sense for us to even skip that last slide, given we have only not even 5 minutes left here. And I'll say my example here quickly and go from there.
I 100% agree. We're on the same page.
Yeah, so just really quick example of a situation that I was mediating and both parents really want to do mediation. And I told them, no, we're not going forward with this. And the one parent in particular was pleading and pleading, no, we must do this. But they were very emotionally distraught, weren't able to focus very well. They so much wanted to do this to get this over with and get going with life. But emotionally, they just were not there at all. They would not have articulated well. There's just all kinds of flags going up for me that this would not be a beneficial process. And so I called it that we're not going forward. This is my decision as a mediator. We're not going forward. And this is what I told both parties so that neither felt that it was the other person's fault of what occurred. We do the best we can to ensure that, well, I don't share information what other parents have told me, that if someone said even outright that I'm not open to going further with mediation, I'll let the other parent know that I've assessed we're not going further with mediation. And that's what my letter to them, that the courts would see that the mediator has assessed it's not going forward with mediation, just to ensure that they can't use it in court inappropriately. So I think we'll just stop right there, Lori. Hope,